My name's Stephen Kelly. I'm one of the two education and training officers with Under One Roof, and we are Scotland's only charity providing information. It is free and partial information on repairs, maintenance, and retrofit and management of tenement flats within Scotland. Now, people that can ask us for information or check the website for information are owner-occupiers, landlords, private tenants, housing professionals, be that local authority staff or factors or letting agents, anybody who's got a stake in looking after or staying in tenement flatted properties within Scotland. So as you see at the bottom of the first slide, we've got our website underoneroof.scot, which is a wonderful website with lots of information, as I say, on maintaining properties and managing properties. So, there we go. No, done. There we go. I get excited there. You might be looking at me going, what is he talking about? I don't stay in a tenement. Well, you might stay in a tenement because in 2004 in the Tenement Scotland Act, legislation was introduced that basically said that if you're staying in a flat that's divided from each other horizontally, you are covered by the legislation within the Tenement Scotland Act 2004. So apart from your traditional tenements, which you all know about, or your modern block of flats, other areas that are covered on this could be a cottage flat or four in a block for those with in a housing background, a converted villa. These are big properties, big townhouses in the past that were owned by merchant bankers or tobacco lords or big businesses. And they've moved out and these big properties have been converted into flats. So that could be 4 flats, 6 flats, 8 flats, 2 flats, whatever. And believe it or not, high-rise multi-storey flats are included as well. So basically what we're saying is a tenement. So it's any flatted accommodation within Scotland is covered by the Tenement Scotland Act. Although we do say if you stay in what's termed a house, be it semi-detached or detached, please feel free to access the information on the website because it might be relevant to you as well, particularly in terms of dealing with contractors. So why are we here? Under One Roof get probably about 100 inquiries a month on average, and a lot of it will be about the management of the property, but the vast majority of them are dealing with problems with housing stock. So in 2023, there was a Scottish Housing Condition Survey carried out where it identified 2.7 million homes in Scotland and identified nearly 900,000 tenements, traditional tenements, and obviously those I said are covered now by the Tenement Scotland Act. And as we know, you just need to walk about Aberdeen, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, and various other towns throughout the country. Many tenements in a poor condition, and some are in critical disrepair. In fact, the survey did identify that over 430,000 of all homes had what they termed urgent disrepair to critical elements. And the critical elements they identified were roofs, walls, windows, external doors. In fact, we did a presentation yesterday for the Glasgow Heritage Group, and somebody asked a question, and obviously that would include steps, external steps to closes would still come under what I would call a critical element and have to be tackled. Interestingly, they also identified that nearly 700,000 of all properties fell below what we would call, well, what they called tolerable standard, which is a big increase of about 250,000 from what we called as urgent disrepair. Now, they changed the goalpost slightly in this, in that they included any properties in Scotland that didn't have a smoke alarm or a carbon monoxide detector, which are very important things that should be in flats, but it's not what you and me would probably look at as a property that's below tolerable standard. But they're obviously going that way as well, looking at it from the fire safety aspect of things. Another reason we've the problems with housing stock is fallen masonry and things falling off buildings, like with chimney pots, it could be parts of the fabric of the building falling down. And as it said there, present a danger and real risk to life. In fact, when I spoke to Edinburgh Shared Repairs a few months ago, they had over 200 incidents of things falling off buildings in Edinburgh. Now, fortunately, to date, and it's probably through more luck than judgment, nobody was seriously injured with anything falling off that building. But because of the society we live in, if something did happen, then the claim would probably go against the owners of that particular tenement block. Hence the reason we should need to look after properties. Now, why don't we look after properties? Now, I've highlighted sort of 4 areas here that I think are relevant, should I say. A lot of people buy tenement flats and don't understand that they're responsible for common areas of those flats. They've maybe saved up, bought their pride and joy, and they moved into that tenement and they spend all their focus and attention on that. But they're unaware that they're also responsible for some areas that are common. Be that the roof to close, the back garden, the front garden, the steps to close. So they're unaware of their responsibilities. If they are aware of the responsibilities, sometimes they don't know how to do it. They don't know what the responsibility is. They don't know how to tackle the repairs and what's involved in arranging the works and what, like shared costs, etc., etc. However, I've put in here the cost of repairs from contractors, and I'll say a bad word, Brexit. When Brexit kicked in, what was obviously decided 2016, but it's impacted supply costs for contractors. So material costs have increased since Brexit kicked in, and allied to the COVID epidemic that kicked in 2019, 2020, you'll find contractors that weren't able to work for probably a year and a bit. And what they've done is they've increased the prices. I was going to use that pun and go through the roof, that's terrible. But contractors' prices have increased. So what used to be maybe £50 an hour, they'd be charging labour costs, may well be up to at least £80 an hour, £100 an hour. And they're not going back the way, because if people are accepting those hourly rates, they'll continue to charge a lot more money for the work. So as their costs have increased, unfortunately, people's financial resources have decreased through the cost of living crisis, other things they've got to pay for. So your disposable income has reduced as the cost of repairs from contractors has increased. So there's 4 areas there that, we could discuss in more depth on another occasion. But I say people don't know what they've got to maintain. They don't know how to tackle the repairs that they've got to maintain. And sometimes they can't afford to get the work done. So as I say, we get over 100 inquiries a month on various issues. And one that I hate is chimneys. I hate chimneys. That's why chimneys isn't in this presentation. And I also hate insurance. We could do a whole session on insurance as well. However, because of the fire that happened in Perth in summer, we decided through our discussions at a team meeting and under one roof, it's better if we reintroduced the subject of insurance. So the Tenement Scotland Act 2004 stipulated that everybody who stays in a tenement flat should have adequate insurance. I've changed it to sufficient insurance. So if you don't have it, you're going to have to find the money to pay for major repairs. So as an example, the fire in Perth, 8 people had to get moved out because of a significant fire, and only 4 of those people had insurance. So the insurance they had would pay for any rebuilding of the property, but the other 4 didn't have any insurance at all, or the insurance they had wasn't sufficient enough to enable them to go ahead and rebuild the property. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. But what we recommend is owners should have a building reinstatement valuation carried out by a surveyor, and we recommend that's done every 3 to 5 years, probably 5 years. And it should be noted that this reinstatement value could be more than what you bought the property for. So if you might have bought a property for £200,000, the reinstatement value could be £250,000, £300,000. But as I say there, if you don't have insurance, you'll need to pay the cost of any damages from your own funds, even if it's not your fault. So if somebody sets fire to a property because they're drunk or they're falling out with their partner, whatever it is, or in a bad mood, then the fire happens. If you don't have insurance, you may have to pay for that through your own funds. Interestingly enough, we have got a meeting with Howden's insurance brokers, I think, at the end of November. And what we're hoping to do is hold a webinar in the new year. So I say, if you check our website, do the events page, hopefully something will be there about insurance, where you'll have experts talking to you on insurance, common building insurance, individual building insurance, contents insurance, etc., etc. But we would always recommend that owners have both buildings and contents insurance. I mean, if you've got a mortgage and your mortgage provider would probably insist that you take out building insurance. Having said that, they don't insist on the reinstatement value in the insurance. You just say, if you've got building insurance, yes, that's fine. But as I say, please check our events page probably at the start of the new year. We'll find out when a webinar's getting held. So if we are going to carry out major repairs or even minor repairs to a tenement property, how do we go about it? The first thing you've got to do is use the legislation. So we have your titles, which gives you your name, your address, have you any charges on the property, have you a mortgage on the property. But the thing we're really looking at is the real burdens, which is the other 20 pages, whatever, at the back of the property. And that'll detail information on what you're responsible for in terms of managing the property and maintaining the property. It'll identify what parts of the building are commonly owned, what your rights and responsibilities are in relation to this common property, how to make decisions and how you split the costs. So it could be shared cost, it could be split it 8 ways, it could be a split of the cost because some flats are bigger than others. There'll be certain things in the title, the real burdens where people who stay in main door closes don't pay for the close unless they've got access to the close, etc., etc. However, if you go onto our wonderful website, you'll see this writing on most pages that says, if the titles are clear on common areas, they must be followed. That's your gospel. No changes, you must follow the titles. However, titles have been with us since the 1700s. 2 bits of paper used to be sassine registers, etc. And then you change it to titles. But because there's been changes to the properties, it may well be you've had 3 flats converted into 2, or 2 flats converted into 3, or 1 flat converted into 2, then some things may have changed. So what we're saying there and what the Tenement Scotland Act says in 2004, if the titles are silent, i.e. don't mention parts of the building, or unworkable, I'll make it a better word for that, I can't really say unworkable. For example, we get inquiries where they've looked at the building, they've looked at the shared costs, they've added them all up, and it's come to 110%. You can't split 110%, so that makes it unworkable. Owners can then default to the tenement management scheme, which should make it easier for you to maintain your property. So similar to the titles that describe the parts of the building that every owner should maintain, tells you to come to agreements, how you split the costs. One big change was the 2004 Act stated the roof is now a shared responsibility. Say it with me, unless the titles say otherwise. So if your titles say that the 2 top floor flats are responsible for the roof, that's what they're responsible for. If it doesn't make it clear or it's unworkable, then it's a shared responsibility, even though you stay on the ground floor. Okay. I've put in development management scheme as well. It might not be relevant to those that are attending this webinar, but the development management scheme was introduced as a result of the Title Conditions Act in 2006. And this legislation is used in large-scale residential developments and modern blocks of flats. It should be more straightforward. It's a bigger document, probably a land certificate document for those in the game, and it should make it easier to manage these bigger developments and modern blocks of flats in terms of managing common areas. Okay, but as I say, that's your first point of reference if you're looking to carry out any repairs. And now I'll just contradict what I've said, but basically the legal management position is, as I say, use the rules to set down the titles and the deed of conditions. That's the first point of contact. If the real burdens, as I say, are silent or unworkable, you can default to the tenement management scheme. Number 3, in a modern development, you've got a development management scheme, deed of conditions to refer to. However, what you can do is you can manage the building under a combination of 1 and 2 if all owners agree. And as I said prior, probably in the last slide, there may well be properties that are bigger than other properties. So it might be a 1-bedroom in a tenement building, and you have a 2-bedroom in a tenement building, or a 3-bedroom in a tenement building. What the titles will say in that situation is those that stay in the bigger flat, in terms of area, will pay more. But you may find out that they can't afford to pay more, So you can then get together and say, well, tell you what, we'll repair the roof and we'll split it 8 ways rather than the owner who stays in a bigger flat having to pay 25%. But that's up to yourself to make. Because the bottom line, we want these buildings managed and maintained. So if you do decide to manage it whatever way you manage it, and everybody's happy with that, the legislation police isn't going to be chapping your door and say, by the way, you should refer to your titles. Because the bottom line, we will need to repair these properties to make sure they become habitable, or continue to be habitable, should I say. Another one that crops up in our inquiries is mutual repairs. Now, I've got a picture on the right-hand side of that slide. It's not exactly clear, but you may well be able to see a drain pipe coming down the front of the property. So drain pipes and chimneys, as I say, I hate chimneys, but drain pipes are easier to explain. The drain pipes are a mutual repair as they only are charged against the flats that are serviced by that drain pipe. So if you've got a drain pipe in the front of your property and it goes down 32221202, they pay for the repair to that. The people on the other side don't have to pay for it. Okay. You may well have a situation where the drain pipe is down the middle of a building, but it covers 4 flats on one side and 4 flats on the other. Again, only those flats that are serviced by the drains pay for any repairs to that particular drain. I say the reason I hate chimneys is I could produce a drawing where chimneys you would think would go into every flat going down a building. Well, they don't. They might miss out flats. So the chimney might go into the top floor flat, first floor flat, and the ground floor flat, and the person two up isn't serviced by it. So it's not easy. Closing stairs, I touched on it before. They are not relevant for mutual repairs when they do not provide access to all the flats. So as I say, if you have 2 main door flats, they don't enter the close. They're not responsible for any repairs to the internal of the close. That could be stair nosings, handrails, etc. But only those flats, or so I say, the flats not responsible for the costs are not involved and cannot vote. So as I say, if drain pipes can down one side of the building, 01112131, they only get to vote on whether they want to proceed with the works or not. And as I say, if the example, if you had adjoining buildings where drain pipe, maybe consider the left-hand side and the right-hand side are 2 separate buildings, they'll have to split the costs evenly. I mean, it says 50% of the total cost is shared by building, but basically it's split in 8 ways because it's a mutual repair. I put this slide in the mixed tenure and commercial properties, and I split it into 2 really. The first thing is the ownership of a mixed tenure building. And we are currently having a meeting of minds and under one roof about how we put the information on our website, because there is some discrepancy from local authorities and registered social landlords. But generally speaking, if the local authority or the RSL has a majority ownership, they will just go ahead and do the work and then they'll bill the owners. Even though they should communicate with you before the work's done, pardon me, you'll probably find they will arrange the work and just send you a bill for it. Where there's no majority ownership, in the building on the picture on the top left-hand side is a 6-flatted accommodation. If there's 3 owned and 3 owned by the local authority and RSL, again, they'll have the casting vote because it's on their land. However, where you've got owners in the majority, so you've got a mixed tenure property where 4 out of those 6 blocks are owned by owners. A lot of owners maybe are not keen on carrying out maintenance issues. So a possible maintenance issue with that, even though you may have the RSL is re-roofing all the properties in the building, if the owner's in the majority, it might not be able to get done. But as I say, we're looking at that under one roof at the moment to try and put something understandable and easy to follow on our website under the mixed tenure page. However, there'll obviously be commercial properties maybe attached to your building. And the first port of call was mentioned, the titles and the legal burdens. We've touched on, if there's gaps in the titles, refer to the Tenement Management Scheme. But the thing that should be remembered is that when it comes to a shop and commercial premises, you'll probably find that the person in the shop is not the owner. And it's the owner that's responsible for the repairs. not the person who's probably leased the property out on a rent and repairable lease. It's the owner's responsible for the repairs. The shop's share of any repairs may well be based on rateable value, which means they pay a bigger percentage. Now, this was introduced probably in this before rateable values were scrapped in the late 80s, and it was probably when the high streets were busy, and maybe your butcher shop in the main street was making a lot of money, and people thought, "Oh, that's fine, you're entitled to pay more for a repair." What you'll find is shops are not as much profit as they used to have, and therefore they don't have as much disposable income. So they may stick their head. I mean, bigger percentage could be up to 50% or 60% of a repair job. Again, if it's a serious job, you could consider a one-off arrangement to reduce the cost. You might say to the shop owner, "Tell you what, on this occasion, we'll let you pay 20% and we'll split the cost." We're not saying that's the way to go, we're just know it's happened in the past. And I say the most important thing is getting the building repaired. Okay. If you are deciding to do any of these repairs in mixed tenure commercial properties, we would always advise you to use proper procedures, which I'll come on to in the next couple of slides. I put a couple of slides in here on listed buildings and conservation areas. If you stay in a listed building, or you think you might stay in a listed building, you can check Historic Environment Scotland to see if you are there. Do you stay in a conservation area? Check with local authority, or there's a link to another website there. But basically, the bottom line is you're thinking of doing anything to that listed building, you can't do anything without consent. So you should contact your own local authority's planning department, raise it with them. It might be you don't need permission, but we would always say first point of call, apart from checking the titles, is contact your local authority planning department and ask these questions. I'm thinking of repairing or cleaning the stones. I'm thinking of replacing windows, or I'm carrying internal works. If it's just building consent you need is free, as it says at the bottom, you need planning permission, then they'll charge you a fee for that. Some links here for conservation areas. Conservation advice will come from your local authorities, planning department, as I say. There may well be a band of architects and surveyors out there who've got experience of managing these type of buildings, the material you need to use, how you get the work done. If you're looking for some funding or possible grants, you have conservation trusts in your area, or contact Historic Environment Scotland. And because a listed building or a conservation area, there may well be specialist trades out there with experience of how to manage that particular repair to keep the building the way it was originally planned. Okay. So, as I touched earlier on, proper procedures. Again, you on your website, you'll see, check your title deeds. You'll also check a phrase called proper procedures. And this does ensure that the decisions that you're making are procedurally correct. There we go. The first thing you need to do is trace owners and landlords. So we've got owners. You want to find out who an owner is, you can contact Register of Scotland. If you want to check on the landlord's details, first point of call would probably be your local authority landlord registration team. If they don't know or don't get back to you, you could check the Scottish Landlord Register. If you suspect a property's been empty for a while and you don't know why, again, contact your local authority. They may have an empty homes officer, or check Empty Homes Partnership, who may know why the property is empty and what they're planning on doing with it. Put a wee link in there for shop owners, because I say if you stay above commercial properties, it might be useful to find out who the shop owner is. And I think this is the Scottish Assessors Association. There's a link there to the website. But, so once you find out who the owners are and the landlords are, it's imperative that you use proper procedures. And by that means all those that have been in business or worked, you have to have everything in writing. So an owner can call a meeting, and you need to give 48 hours notice, maybe longer than that, and invite everybody to that meeting. Now, we live in the world now of social media, so you can put notes through doors, you can send them letters, you can do email, texts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. There must be others that I forgot. But everything must be recorded in writing. Primarily, the first point is the purpose of the meeting. don't just invite everybody to a meeting and say, come on to my house and we'll watch your telly. You invite them to a meeting to focus on something that has to be done. Okay? Have an agenda, take minutes, do action points. Again, it has to be recorded in writing. When a decision has been agreed, again, all owners must be informed in writing. The reason for that is if you don't follow those two areas, a bad apple, an owner can appeal against decisions if procedures have not been followed. So they can say, well, I never got an invite to the meeting. I didn't know what they were talking about. Nobody told me it was going to cost X amount of pounds and my share was going to be Y. So we always recommend that you use proper procedures. In terms of voting, there is one vote per flat, including jointly owned flats or houses in multiple occupancy. That will be the owner of the flat that will get that vote. Generally speaking, unless the titles say otherwise, it sometimes say it could be 2/3 majority. Generally speaking, we're talking about majority decision required to progress with maintenance and is binding on all owners. So if you hold a meeting and you're comfortable that every owner up that eight flat block was invited to the meeting and only 6 people turn up, if those 6 people are happy to proceed with roofing works for Tom's sake, then the other 2 owners have to go along with that. Okay. Downside to this is it's a tied decision. 4 out of 8 owners agreeing is not a majority decision, and you cannot proceed with any works. However, the Tenement Scotland Act 2004 introduced legislation for duty to maintain and emergency repairs. Duty to maintain ensures that the parts of the tenement that provide support and shelter have to be maintained. Okay? It doesn't require a majority agreement, although we always recommend it should be sought wherever possible. And there's no obligation on other owners to pay up front. But once the work's done, they may have to pay their share. Same goes for emergency repairs, repairs which cannot wait to hold a meeting. There's water coming into your top floor flat. You cannot wait to hold a meeting in a week's time for everybody to vote whether to progress it or not. It's a fine bit of legislation, but the downside to it is it says there's no obligation on other owners to pay up front. It means you may have to fund the repairs yourself and then pursue your neighbours for their cost. Now, there is a template on our website called Duty to Maintain. You can use that, but it's a fight. I say it's a good piece of legislation, but the downside to it is you may have to find the money up front. Another one we get through a lot of inquiries is dealing with contractors. Now, if you know a contractor that's very, very good and gives you value for money, great, go with that. However, a lot of people don't know contractors, so what we would recommend is when it comes to finding contractors, contact your local authority to see if they've got a trusted trader scheme. You've also got Scottish Trading Standards, link there. There's another one called Buy With Confidence and Trustmark. You've always got ones you see on the tellies at checkatrade.com. You've got Which Trader, Trusted Trader. You've got Trusted Trader itself. I'm sure David Tennant does a voiceover for one of them. So there's lots of information out there, lots of contractors. I think a lot of these trading websites is you maybe put in what you're looking for and 3 contractors will contact you to try and arrange a visit and then give you a price for it. However, whoever you're dealing or contacting, you can still do further contractor checks off yourself. You do their public liability insurance and a health and safety policy. What experience do they have in the work you want done? Are they a jack of all trades, master of none? Are they really an electrician, but they turn their hand to plumbing works? And I mean, I worked in care and repair. We had a small repairs officer who was very good at plumbing, but turned his hand to electrical works one day and nearly set fire to the house. So make sure they know what they're talking about. And the other big thing is, if you're doing major works, try and ensure there's a guarantee or a warranty insurance provided. Big thing that crops up in our inquiries is issues when work has went wrong. So what we're saying is the tender process, which is basically the management process for getting works done. Make sure you include everything in the specification, what you want done. We had an inquiry a couple of weeks ago where somebody emailed me and said, That contractor obviously didn't paint the close once he'd finished. And we said, did you ask me to paint the close? No, we just thought he would do it. Unless you ask the contractor to do everything, they won't do it. And if they do have to come back to it, they'll increase their tender price. So try and ensure whatever you're looking to get done, all bases are covered. Now, if you have to use a surveyor to assist you in that or professional advice, then that's probably the best way to go because it will save you money in the long term. We would always ask you to request at least 2 tender prices. An ideal would be 3 tender prices, but 2, just so make sure they're all singing for the same hymn sheet. It's not always easy. Contractors sometimes don't want to be in a tender process. They just want the job. But at least try and get 2 tender prices. Final selection should not be on price alone and be very suspicious of low costs. I and another lifer are a member of a housing association board in Glasgow, and we'd put out a ground maintenance contract, and one the price came in £2,000 cheaper than the second or the third one. So we were suspicious. We spoke to the person, and it turned out it hadn't included 4 streets. He didn't know we did the terrace and the circus and all that sort of stuff. So don't just take the price and go, that's fine, we'll just take that because it's cheaper. Because sometimes prices can be too good to be true. And when it comes to managing the project, and again, this is mainly for major works, try and agree a start date, try and ensure progress reports are submitted to the owners. We would always recommend you put contingency costs in because you don't know what they're going to find. If they are fixing a roof and they strip the roof back, you may find the joists are gone or the timbers need replaced. So wherever possible, put in some contingency costs. You can always put in a penalty charge if they said they're going to complete it in the 1st of December and you're now in the 1st of January. And unless they've got a reason for delay, you could maybe ask them to pay you some money back. But it's a useful tool to consider when you're doing major works. Obviously, paying for repairs is a big issue. But the bottom line is if owners are responsible for the repair, and that's either they have to pay an 1/8 share or it could be a mutual repair, they must pay their share of the repair. So there's some payment options here now. I think Aberdeen still does missing shares, but missing shares are not grants. Grants are no longer. If you're doing some work and you can't afford to pay it and the council are willing to give you missing shares, there will be hurdles to jump to get the missing share. And to say it's not free money, if they consider to give you missing shares and you apply for it and are awarded it, there will be charges. There'll be charges for an admin fee and there'll be an interest rate added onto it. And it'll be recorded on the title of the property. So when you do sell the property, you'll have to pay that money back, probably with other money added onto it. Now I know, I think it's South Ayrshire had £300 for an admin fee and a 10% interest rate charge. So if you're getting £10,000 off North South Ayrshire Council, and you decide to sell the property, you'll be paying them back at least £11,300. But again, missing shares may well still be used by Aberdeen City Council. The reason I say may, last year only 14 out of 32 local authorities offered missing shares. And as money's getting tighter, even if they offer missing shares, the actual fund might be reduced. You could always consider using your own savings or consider joining a credit union. You could borrow, as most people tend to do, either through a commercial loan or you may have equity available on your property. But before you went down that route, we would always advise you to take financial advice. You could open a joint maintenance account or a building reserve fund. There is a paper going through the tenement management working group at the moment where they're looking at maybe putting in building reserve funds. I personally think the building reserve fund is probably more useful for a newer development than it is for an older tenement, but what do I know? And you can also contact your family or friends to see if they'll lend you the money. They actually might charge a bigger interest rate than the commercial loan, but it's worthwhile contacting them and see if they may have some money to help you along the way. If owners are unable to pay, we would recommend you contact Citizens Advice or Money Advice Centres. Interestingly enough, I say going back to my housing association experience, we had a welfare benefits officer managed to get an older woman £9,000 in backdated benefits because she didn't want to apply for it and didn't feel the need to apply for it. But she eventually came to see us. and the welfare benefits officer say managed to get £9,000 in backdated benefits. The problem we've got is obviously people refuse to pay and stick their head in the sand, even though they've got to pay. So what you can do, some options here, you could proceed to instruct the repair, pay the contractor and then invoice the owner for their share. If they're still not paying, you could consider sending the owner a letter of intent to sue. That'll be the red letter you get when you don't pay your bills. We've all been there. Or you could raise a payment action in the sheriff court to cover payment from the owner. It's called a simple procedure if the share is less than £5,000. It's not a simple procedure because, as I say, you would have to go to sheriff court. You would have to prove that you'd used proper procedures and you had written evidence when you held the meeting, what the meeting was involved, who was there, what you all agreed on, what you all signed up to. So, but you can still go to the sheriff officer or sheriff court to try and recover that money. Or you could bite the bullet and split the bill between the owners willing to pay. Divide by 7 rather than 8. Again, we're not recommending it. We know what's happened in the past, depending what the 8th share, is. It could be £1,000. And if you're splitting it 7 ways, that's about £150 each, which might be easier to stomach rather than going to court when there's no guarantee you're going to win and there might be court charges against it. Again, we're not recommending it. We know by experience it has happened in the past. Yeah. I put one slide on here on property factors. You may have a factor, okay? And as I say, we had a meeting or the webinar yesterday for Glasgow Heritage Centre, and we've agreed that we're going to do a whole session on dealing with property factors, which is more prevalent probably to the Glasgow area than maybe Aberdeen. But if you do have a property factor, they are governed by the Property Factors Act. So any factor that is providing factor services has to be registered, okay? There's a code of conduct introduced in 2011, which was updated in 2021. The property factor must adhere to that code of conduct, and every owner must have a written statement of service, which covers things from their authority to act, the service they're going to provide, how they're going to manage repairs, and how they're going to bill you, their debt recovery, etc., etc. If you're unhappy with your factor, you could use their complaints policy first, and once you've exhausted that, and if you're still not satisfied, you could raise that with the Housing and Property Chamber, first tier chamber to you and me, and that will try and resolve the issues between yourself and property factors. And the bottom line, you could actually change your property factor, either by titles, which may have a manager burdens attached to it, owner's agreement, and a notice period to the property factor, which should be included in the written statement of service. Should probably in the small writing, you know, you buy cars and buy washing machines. There should be in the bottom of the written statement of service how you can terminate the contract with a factor. But as I say, obviously I'll speak to Douglas later and see if they want to consider doing it next year, having a session on to deal with property factors like Glasgow. Okay. Nearly finished. My Martin Luther King slide. So again, I probably used last year, but there's no reason why I shouldn't use it again. We're always keen that owners try and ensure their building remains in good condition. If it's your beautiful home from wherever and you've paid for it, or you just bought a flat to let it out, it's an investment. So look after it. People will buy cars and wax them and wash them every weekend, but they don't really look after property. So what we're recommending is you carry out regular inspections of all common areas. We're not asking you to hang from a roof, but you may be coming back from work or school or wherever. You come out your car, you get off the bus, you get off the train, have a look at your building and see if anything stands out to you, like a gutter's hanging off or the drain pipe's a bit squint. As I say, if you do that, you may save the big cost at the end of the day. What we would recommend, and this advice comes from a senior architect, is you get gutters cleaned every year and get your roof checked annually. Obviously, it helps ensure the building remains in good condition, but from an insurance perspective, if you've got a problem with your roof and you go to your insurance company and ask them to pay for the repairs, the first thing they're going to ask is, when was the last time the roof was checked? 5 years ago. They'll come back and go, either an act of God, or they'll come back with wear and tear. So we would recommend you always get the gutters cleaned and get the roof checked annually. You could consider forming yourself in an owners association. It will be incorporated or unincorporated, but it's a focal point for all the owners to do that. Again, there's legislation possibly getting discussed with the Scottish Law Commission, and the paperwork supposedly going to the Scottish Government to see whether there should be mandatory owners associations in all blocks, like they have in other parts of Europe and America and Australia. We would always recommend you maybe consider a planned maintenance schedule. Now, we're not talking major works here. It gives you just maybe painting the internal clothes, or painting the soffits, or, looking at the front door, getting the steps, look at the steps leading up to the property to make sure they're in good condition. Again, somebody falls down those stairs, you may be getting a bill or a claim for their accident. Another one go through the Tenement Management Working Group is getting the building surveyed every 5 years. Churches have to get first surveyed every 5 years, properties don't. And the other one is saving for future repairs or consider opening a joint maintenance account. I mean, in Republic of Ireland, I think 2011, I think I'm correct, they put a legislation on MD moving into property, had to put €200 away annually. Doesn't sound a lot of money. Or you could save for future repairs if you can. £10 a week could be £400 a month that you're saving for it. The bottom line is, if you buy a property in a tenement flat or accommodation, unless you're really lucky or you don't stay there that long, you're going to have to pay something towards a common repair. And let's try and ensure that that amount of money you have to pay is as little as possible. So as I say, save for future repairs wherever possible, and maybe consider a joint maintenance account. If you do have a factor, we would advise you to liaise closely with the factor. Because the downside, I mean, the bottom line with factors is they are an agent working on your behalf, not the other way about. So you can dictate to them how you want that property managed within reason. So maybe ask them to do site visits, maybe hold regular meetings with them. Because a lot of factors will just send you bills out. So going on be progressive here and maybe contact your factor and see what they can provide for you. It may cost you a wee bit more money, but again, it's better to do that than suddenly get a bill through your door for £5,000 for repairs. Okay. So finally, how can we help? As I say, underoneroof.scot is our website. There's useful information on their website on maintenance, management issues, events. We've got a repair checker on the website. We've also got an inquiry service, Ask the Expert. Top right hand button, you hit that. It's no names, no pack drill. All we ask is your email address, your local authority area, and what your inquiry is about. And myself and Jacqueline try to get back to you within reason, with no longer than 3 days after you put your inquiry back. If it's longer than that, it's because we've been out about doing events. And we'd also recommend you subscribe for the monthly e-newsletter. It's free, but once a month, Rebecca, our comms officer, will send out your newsletter with flavour of the month, be that legislation, be it an issue that's raised its head over the inquiries we receive, and a list of events.